We're going to be taking a look at rational equations. In essence, a rational equation is an equation with at least one rational expression. Strategies that we have learned before, such as solving polynomial equations, quadratic equations, and to simplify rational expressions will be used here extensively. To solve an equation with rational coefficients, the fractions can be cleared by multiplying both sides by the common denominator. And specifically, the lowest common denominator is the best way to go. So I'm just going to take this example. I'm going to identify my lowest common denominator. Well, I start off with x over 12, and I'm going to factor any denominator. Well, 12 is really 3 times 4, minus 2/3 is equal to 4. So what I notice from here is that my lowest common denominator is going to be 3 times 4, or 12. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to multiply both sides of my equation by 12. And really, what are we going to be doing with rational equations? We're going to be multiplying by my lowest common denominator. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 12 and 12. And what we'll see here is that we have to distribute that multiplication exactly twice. So I have 12 times x is 12x, over, 12, minus 2 times 12 is 24, over 3 is equal to 1/4 times 12. And really, I just multiplied both sides by 12, probably not very well, but what I get is x minus 24 over 3 is 8. 1/4 times 12 is 3. So I get an expression that x is equal to 11. Now, what point would I want to drive home here is really that when you multiply by your lowest common denominator, you get rid of any denominators that's there. So the same strategy can be used for rational expressions. But first we need to identify the non-permissible values. Non-permissible values are when your denominator is equal to 0. Then we're going to identify a common denominator and multiply both sides of the equation. And then, like before, we may check for extraneous solutions, false solutions. Let's start off with this first example. Now, my lowest common denominator. My lowest common denominator is going to be 4x. If you take a look at the first expression, I have a factor of 2 times x. The next one is 4, is a factor of 2 times 2. And this next one, 4, is really 4, it's really 2 times 2 times x. So I need to make sure that my lowest common denominator is going to contain all the factors, right? So it's 2 times 2 times x, better known as 4x if you're unable to identify it. So that's my common denominator. Now I'm going to identify my non-permissible values. My non-permissible values, I like to call these restrictions. Restrictions come about when our denominator is equal to 0. Remember, we can't divide by 0. My first restriction will be x cannot be equal to 0. So far, step number 1, I've identified my lowest common denominator. Step number 2, I have my restriction. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to multiply both sides of the equation by my lowest common denominator. So I have 5 over 2x plus 3 over 4 is equal to 9 over 4x. I'm going to multiply both sides of this equation by, now this gets kind of tricky for some. I'm going to multiply it by 4x. Both sides of the equation by 4x. Now remember, you're going to distribute, on the left-hand side, you're going to distribute that multiplication. So when I do that, I'm going to begin my next step of multiplication by 4x. This will be 20x over 2x plus 3 times 4x over 4. Let me do that again. That didn't look very good. 3 over 4 times 4x. And this is going to be 9 over 4x times 4x. Now I'm just going to simply reduce each component. 20x over 20x over 2x. This is better known as 10. We cancel out a factor of x, and we cancel out a factor of 2, which will leave me with 10. Now 3 over 4 times 4x. Well, the factors of 4 cancel each other out. This is better known as 3x. And on the right-hand side of my equation, a factor of 4x and 4x cancel each other out. So all I'm left with is 9. Now, this looks fairly nice to me, I'm hoping. So I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. I'm going to divide both sides by 3 now. So what I get is x is equal to negative 1/3.